saying back when we were younger, we used to play cricket, and the English were always very textbook with the way they played. So when you're batting, it was always straight back, Jeffrey Boycott. When it was bowling, it was always line and length. Whereas compared to the West Indians and the Pakistanis, they were more known for their extravagance and a swashbuckling style of playing. So the English are more technical, but the Pakistanis and West Indians are more flamboyant and more flash. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. The difference between the West Indies and the Pakistanis were the best teams at those times, 80s and 90s, but the English were always the most technical. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not always technical doesn't mean the best.
It doesn't. It doesn't always like you described. Like I saw people putting name. And listen, I'm a Pernell Whitaker. You know me. That's my guy. That's my favorite fighter of all time. But if we're talking technical fighters of all time, I wouldn't put Pernell in a technical list. The only reason why, and I don't want people to take what I'm saying out of context. This brother here will tell you the way I feel about Pernell Whitaker. But Pernell didn't always do things technically. He was able to be bailed out at times with some God-given abilities that most guys wouldn't learn in the gym if they was in the gym 365 days nonstop. It's just that he just had a natural, how can I put this, way of anticipating where punches was coming from and slip. Not saying it's not an art, because it is. It was very skillful what he did. But
it's a different art, isn't it?
It's a different art. Like Pernell was off balance a lot. So most guys, if you're off balance, you're going to get, and that's why he got dropped occasionally by guys he had no business getting dropped against, but he just be off balance, because he was so agile the way he would critique his body back and forth, almost like a ballerina. Like he could just twirl his body, and the average guy can't do that. He was just blessed with those abilities. So when we talk about technical abilities, let's talk about a guy like Mike McCollum, who was created in a lab by Dr. Eddie Futch. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I've seen videos, I call him Dr. Eddie Futch, because when you listen to him break down the way they pretty much drew Mike McCollum up like out of a lab, and the way they taught him how to fight, how to be so technically sound. You'll never see Mike McCollum lunging, never leaving his feet, never overreaching the target. He's always in range. Everything is neat. It's on a straight line. He don't waste punches. You'll never see him throwing a third or fourth unnecessary punch that's not required. So this is the technical stuff that we're talking about when we say technical. And I'm not saying Mike McCollum is one of the most technical fighters of all time. I'm just trying to qualify what we mean by technical, the most technical fighter of all time.
Yeah, I think you said it best about Pernell Whitaker. I remember you describing Pernell Whitaker as sitting down in the toilet reading the paper. I always tell my guys in the gym that when I talk about Pernell Whitaker, what you used to tell me about him, because that's exactly what he was. He was literally sitting down and making guys like De La Hoya miss. It's amazing. And that's not technical. You can't teach someone that.
You can't. I was going to say, you and I, how can we teach somebody how to do that? You
can't. And that also goes back to the interesting point about Roy Jones Jr. A lot of people say Roy Jones Jr. cannot teach boxers what he had. What's your opinion of that then?
Me and Brad, man, we bumped heads on this. Shout out to Brad, that's my guy. Brad loves Roy Jones. You had him on. I'm sure he's talked about it. And to be fair, he actually did make me think about a few things, because I know that guys, when you use the word athletic, it could be kind of come off as offensive to fighters, because it's almost like you're saying that they're just athletic and they don't have technical skills. Look, anybody that boxes, you got to have some technical skills, right?
Exactly.
I just think that with Roy, where Brad and I think we'll part ways at, I just think Roy was extremely technical. I'm not saying that he wasn't. He had I think that he gets written off from being this freakish athlete, which he was. But I think two things can be true. I think you can say he's a freakish athlete. I think you can say he's a technical guy, but you also can say that, look, he was able to get away with a lot of stuff that an average guy wouldn't be able to get away with. Like he fought with his hands beneath his waist. He lunged. The lunging we talked about. Roy, he threw a sweeping right hand. That's what it was called. Sweeping means you leave.
But in the Olympics, he was quite technical, though, wasn't
Yeah, he was more technical, but he had abilities. When you're that fat, his offense was his defense, right?
he? Yeah.
I dare you to try to land a punch on me, and I'm going to count. I'm going to tag you with my speed. I'm gonna count everything you do. I'm gonna offset with my speed.
I
And
can't
guys,
remember who it was. I think
huh?
one of Roy Jones' opponents. I can't remember who it was. They said Roy Jones was so fast that he would make a mistake, realize he made a mistake, and he would change it mid punch and hit
Mid
you
punch. Yeah.
because he
I
was just
mean,
so fast.
his IQ, which gets lost in all this,
Yeah,
is that, like you said, stuff like that, like changing your punch mid punch, and to bait guys, to dictate. Because you still have to have an IQ.
yeah,
You can have all the cool attributes in the world, be fast, be strong, but if you don't know how to use it and matriculate others with it, it's pointless.
yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of studying of fighters. Roy Jones Jr. is one of the smartest fighters I've studied.
He's very smart,
He
but
used to
I don't want
disguise his punches. Other guys set you up, and they set you up for a punch, or they set you up for a knockout down line. Roy Jones would see a mistake, he'd pounce on it. He'd be like a sniper, and that's it. He'd finish you off. As soon as he saw a mistake, he'd pounce on you, and you're done. So he had a different type of IQ, but yeah, he was extremely smart fighter as well, which, like I said, people don't give him credit for because of his athletic traits.
But with that being said, and again, like, and it's a shame we got to do this because when you do these lists, you don't want people to think you're leaving Roy Jones off because, like you said, Roy Jones is a better overall fighter than a lot of these guys that we'll probably put on this list. But when you talk about the guys, the technical abilities of guys, right? So now we're getting into somewhere where I think, and speaking of Brady, on my post, he actually put this guy on here, and I think you, him, and I collectively would agree that fundamentally, I don't think there was a guy that was mistake free like Ricardo Lopez was. I mean, the guy just did everything right. Wasn't big, wasn't strong, wasn't fast, but was able to take this little frame of a body and do all the right stuff. You know,
Yeah,
foot was always in the right place. All his punches on the straight and narrow. We talked about dictating the pace of a fight. Most of his fights that he was ever in, and one particular fight was the Rosendo Alvarez fight, which I recommend to people if you haven't seen it, especially the second fight. Funny story about this, right? Me and my dad, we came home and we caught like the end of the fight. We thought he lost because his face was all bloody. And I ended up watching the fight, obviously, later on, but we thought he lost the fight because he was all covered in. But Ricardo, from a technical standpoint, he just had a knack of knowing how to put punches in the right place. And he was never in a hurry, never in a rush. The placement of him, the way he would jab and turn the hook around a corner to the body. Shout out to Jordan McCullum who did that masterfully. But punch placement is another underrated compliment that people don't like to give. It's
yeah, just
so important.
something that was taught back in the old school days.
Oh, absolutely.
Tip of the chin under the heart, solar plexus. These things are taught, but not so
You
much
ever
now.
watch you ever watch an old jail movie? In the jail movies, right, they would have like these dummies, right? And the old school prison guy would show the young prison guy, where to stab a guy at, and they would have all these pin marks on his body, like where to go at. This is how you do this to the guy. That's how they train, not to kill guys, but they train guys how to put punches in certain places to slow guys down and potentially stop them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And not
I
just
did hear. Yeah, I did hear Harry Wiley Senior, the coach, one of the coaches of Sugar Robinson, his amateur coach, and also in his pro corner. He used to teach Sugar Robinson where to hit people at specific spots. So
yeah,
Archie Moore has an interview where he's discussing it as well. So the old timers would definitely look for those places he mentioned. Um, Lopez's accuracy, but that's also a shout out to his coach, Nacho Beristain, because if you look at his fighters, I think another name that
yeah,
was mentioned was
yeah.
Manuel Marquez, also trained by
Yeah.
Beristain.
Yeah,
So
Nacho been around. Most people learned about Nacho from Marquez, but those who been around and studied the sport know he was around way before then. That was kind
yeah,
of his tail end of his career.
Yeah. But it's telling that some of his fighters were mentioned in your post that most technical fighter. So it's a compliment to him as well, the way he trains these guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, listen, the fighter obviously going to get the bulk of the credit, but you have to have somebody teaching you this stuff. Like, from a technical standpoint, somebody brought up Winky Wright. Now, I wouldn't put him all the time, but again, a guy that fought out of an earmuff controlled you with a jab, basically,
That's
Larry
a good shout
Holmes,
as well, isn't it? Winky Wright.
Yeah, Larry Holmes, another guy that was very technical, jab variations, the way you use a jab in so many different directions, and how it could be used as a weapon, it could be used as a stabilizer, it could be used as a finder. I'm trying to find you, control. It's so many different things, but everybody don't use the jab as that. Most guys use it as the BS jab. I'm gonna just fling the jab out there, just fling it, with no rhyme or reason for it.
Yeah, you mentioned about technical fighters always being balanced position to punch. That's probably why I mentioned Joe Louis. That's why I mentioned Joe Louis, because he was very precise. Never rushed as well. Never saw him getting rushed or sort of. Even when Billy Conn was running around in circles, Lewis stayed in his shape. Never got out of shape. Eventually, McCon made a mistake and Lewis won. But Lewis was one of those guys. He's always in position to punch. He never really overextended. His small steps. Jose Napoleon is also another one, the balance, the footwork. But Lewis, his balance was perfect. I suppose he was the sort of archetype model, and for the heavyweight boxers until Ali sort of came and changed the landscape a little bit. But yeah, Lewis was someone came to mind immediately for me, the most technical fighter of all time.
You brought up Joe Louis, right? And it's funny because I think about guys like Andre Ward. I always say Andre Ward fought like a guy from that era, right? And it's funny because I feel like that about Shakur too. I think that the street fighters that's come along, and we still got to wait and see Shakur, but it was Bernard, Andre Ward, and I'm putting Shakur in there is because I've seen him do this, and you just don't see this from modern day fighters, and that's blindfolding guys with the jab. Now, back in the day, you got away with doing that. It was technically you're not supposed to leave your mid open, but Ward mastered it, and these are techniques that guys like to have the world to know even to do that just shows the type of student that Andre Ward is. And shout out to Virgil Hunter, his trainer, who I don't think get enough credit for helping Bill Ward, because somebody has to teach you these tactics, right? Show you old fights and stuff like that. But Ward was such a technical guy that leaned on old school tactics, positioning guys. We always talk about moving guys at the hip, turning them, and I'm going to place you where I would need you to be. Ward fight game was based on, basically being like I used to use a bodyguard reference, right? Like a bouncer, like escorting you where he wanted you to go when you became, unruly, right? And that's what Ward did. He was so good at dictating and controlling direction, with his hands, but not throwing punches, just moving guys around in position. Interestingly enough, one of his toughest fight was the Kovalov fight, and the reason being because he couldn't move Kovalov like he was moving some of those other guys. Kovalov was a big, strong, light heavyweight, until he wasn't in the rematch. But Ward, from a technical, because the guy actually sent me a DM. He said for him, and the guy said he was in his 50s. He said for him, he think Andre Ward is the most technical guy he saw, in his lifetime. He just said the stuff that he was doing, the way he mixed modern day boxing with old school boxing, he was just like, I just never seen no guy do nothing like that. And then a lot of guys was mentioning Floyd Mayweather. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I said for me, it's tough to say pick one, obviously, right? But Floyd Mayweather, out of every fighter that I personally watched for myself, that I studied, I don't think I've ever seen a guy with his discipline and doing things right. Like, he's just so fundamentally and technically sound and under duress we're talking too, because a lot of time fighters, when they're under duress, they resort to even to habits they may just develop that day, but when guys get under duress, they get in a panic mode and they start doing things that aren't fundamental. Floyd, under every situation in his career that he's ever been in under duress, his skill sets heightens. Most of the time he goes into a muff hole and he's walking the opposition backwards, behind the jab, taking lanes away and just picking you apart,
I think that's a very important point you raised, that you can see someone's technique, how they're being a technician, how they react under duress. The same way you mentioned Joe Lewis never was out of shape, and you mentioned Floyd Mayweather when he's under pressure. He did not lose. He didn't become wild. He stuck to his guns, and he always prevailed, didn't he? So yeah, definitely, technically there. I'm going to give you a name. I know you know who he is, and I think he's one of the greatest technicians of all time, Harold Johnson from Philly.
Oh yeah, somebody put him on the post.
Oh, did they? Yeah. So when I first read about him a few years back, what kept being mentioned about him was he was such a technician. So how do you feel about Harold Johnson? Where would you rank him amongst the best technicians of all time?
It's tough, right? Because obviously opposition plays a big part in this.
He had a strong resume, Harold Johnson.
He did. I'm just saying that, I was saying it for Floyd. I was more so speaking from the Floyd respect, is that's the first thing people like to go after. But I'm like, well, Floyd did fight a lot of good fighters. Obviously, he doesn't have on his resume the four kings level of opposition, obviously, and some of the guys, from yesteryears. But I don't know, like, it's tough, man, like to really.
Yeah, to narrow it down, isn't it? It's very tough, isn't it? Because you're always going to leave someone out. It's not one of those top 10 lists of all time. No one's going to be happy, are they, with your selection?
Yeah, it's like, because I think, Iron Scribe had the best. He said it best. He said, "This is a conversation going for months. Like it's so many fighters that when we hang up from this, we're gonna be like, oh, I forgot all about him. We're not Googling. We're just going off the top of our head, like guys that we just think are some of the most technical guys, that we've seen in this sport. You got Wilfred Benitez, who was extremely technical.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they call him the Bible of boxing, but is he not more in the Pernell Whitaker sort of category? We had just those sort of innate abilities. El Radar, for example, make people miss.
He did. But
can you teach that style again? Can you teach that style? Whereas a technician like Joe Lewis always made a balanced position to punch. Ricardo Lopez, you can sort of mold that sort of style.
No, you're right. You're right.
Whitaker and Benitez, I can't see replicating that style there, unless you've got that sort of natural innate ability inside you.
To your point about that's fair, actually. To your point about that, I get kids that send me direct messages and they say, "Who's a good fighter I should start out watching?" And I always try to find guys like a Ricardo Lopez, a Mike McCallum, guys that don't jump out to you on the first sight, like wow. It's wow for us because we're marveling the technical abilities, but to the naked eye, it's not going to jump out wow because there's not a lot of movement and theatrics going on. So I always try to find guys like that because the average person is not going to be able, like you said, to have the upper body movement of a Benitez, of a James Toney, of a Pernell Whitaker. These are guys that just was blessed with freakish, bendable,
I mean, you see, when you've been to boxing gyms, there's always guys in there. There's always one or two guys that are great at making guys miss, and they train the same way as the other guys in the same club, the same coach, but they have that ability, sort of natural instinct, better head movement, better defense. But it's also it's interesting when you say the guys message you who to study. The names you give are the ones who you really think are the best technicians, so to speak. Because I'm the same. If someone asks me who I should study, I tend to pick four names: Mike McCallum, Andre Ward, James Toney, and Sugar Ray Robinson. They're the four names I tend to give if someone asks me who should I follow. Well, obviously I'm not. Well, Mike McCallum studied Sugar Robinson as well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Robinson is most technical because he threw quite wide punches, but he had everything, and he was the greatest fighter of all time. So it's a given that you should watch the greatest fighter of all time. And so many fighters have been influenced by Robinson, such as McCallum, such as Muhammad Ali. So he's always one that I include in that four because he's the greatest. But yeah, McCallum, Ward, Tony, three names that you've mentioned as well. Those ones you always give. So we kind of answer our own question there by giving those names to people when they ask us about who to study.
Yeah, it's important to give people realistic expectations, and it's, you don't want guys be starting off, and this is not a slight to Manny Pacquiao, like, all right, your first fighter I want you to study is Manny Pacquiao. And it's like, Manny's doing stuff that, that gets the average guy knocked into the first row. It's just, but he's able to get away. You get a guy like Felix Trinidad, who, did things that, were questionable at times, but he was able to mask it, with his freakish power, his ability to, set up powerful hooks off a jab, but again, he was given the ability of equalizers to put you down even in his worst night that he was having, and everybody's not going to have it. So you got to be able to, figure out, another way. You got to be a Swiss Army knife in there if you're not blessed with God-given abilities. You got to have one of those things you can do. You can open a can up, you can carve an apple. The knife got to be able to do multiple things, in that ring.
Or Andre Ward, I suppose, fits the bill perfectly, doesn't he? Very versatile fighter. He could do it all, couldn't he?
Yeah.
Similar to Robinson. Robinson was the same. He could, if you wanted to, he could outbox you, he could outbrawl you, he could outthink you, outfight you. Yeah.